Good morning, men. My name is Pastor Carlos Malley. I'm the outreach pastor of the Circle Church of Alexandria, located in Alexandria, Louisiana, here for another episode on Manhood Monday. This morning, I wanted to talk about the topic of spiritual maturity. The scripture I have comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. And it says, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things." Before I answered the call of God on my life, I coached basketball part-time. I and a few men created a program which was centered on mentoring, and we connected it with an AAU basketball team. And the program was called PAT, and it stood for putting away childish things. And the foundation of that program was based on 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. I really loved the organization, the parents, and the student athletes. In fact, many of the parents wanted their children involved in the program because it was more than just playing basketball. It was more than just traveling and competing in all these AAU tournaments. It was about developing the character of their sons and of their daughters, because we actually had a men's program and a women's program eventually. Dr. Tony Evans says that a child speaks and reasons like a child, but a man, a godly man, has grown up in spiritual maturity and puts aside childish things. I don't think this naturally happens with age, because I've met many men who were older than me, but they still carried themselves as boys. Our goal as Christians should always be to grow in spiritual maturity. I've grown to understand that spiritual maturity will only happen full spiritual maturity will only happen when either Jesus returns or he calls us home as believers, whichever comes first. But while we are here, we should all be thriving and striving to grow in biblical sanctification and Christian discipleship. In essence, growing in spiritual maturity. We should be growing stronger daily as husbands. We should be loving our wives as Christ loved the church. That's the agape love that is spoken about in this text, because Christ died for the church. In fact, Paul teaches our love should be so pure that it makes our wives holy, cleansing our wives with the washing of the word that we speak over them daily. We should love them as our own bodies, loving our wives like we love ourselves. In essence, being one flesh and growing in sacrificial love for our wives expresses spiritual maturity with them and the Father. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33, the majority of the text is speaking about how men should love their spouses. This carries over in our parenting as fathers. One of the greatest gifts I saw growing up was the marriage of my grandparents. It provided me a blueprint of what a godly husband does and what a godly woman, certainly and a godly man, looked like in the terms of biblical marriage. My grandparents weren't perfect. They struggled. They took me to church. My grandfather did whatever it took, though, to provide, to protect, and prosper his family. It taught me order. It taught me covenant. It taught me covering, even though those things I had to look at through the lens of my grandparents' life and their marriage. It's what I yearned for as a young child. It's what I now have with my own wife and my own children. In terms of ministry, I felt God called me to prison ministry to reach men because I wanted to give them the gift of what I witnessed through my family and my grandparents, working with incarcerated men in hopes of helping them grow in spiritual maturity. It is why I lead a men's ministry called The Locker Room right here at the Circle Church of Alexandria, which all you men are invited to. Again, focusing on reaching and helping and growing men in spiritual maturity. It is why I lead this weekly devotional, Manhood Monday, in hopes that someone who's watching will be blessed and grow in spiritual maturity. It is why one of my mentors, Dr. Roll, is so passionate about a ministry that he launched called the Kingdom Clarion Call Global Network. A call that I spoke on this morning on this topic, and I will speak on tonight about patience in marriage. You know, he wants us all to grow in spiritual maturity through this call that God has compelled him to lead. I remember watching Dr. Roll go through so much, and yet he still thought enough of me and many other men that he continued to mentor and pour in our lives in the midst of some of the pain that he was going through. He wanted us to grow in spiritual maturity. You know, I cried tears of joy when he married his beautiful wife about a year ago or so, witnessing the most amazing wedding celebration, you know, I had ever seen in my entire life. You know, all the people that he had told me about, that he had done ministry with, and these great connections that he had, all these people were there at this wedding, and we were full witnesses of what was taking place. It was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony, arguably the largest I'd ever seen. I'm grateful for he and men on that call, the men of the locker room, the men of the Circle Church of Alexandria, the men that are in my life that constantly speak into my life, such as Pastor Marcus Mann, Pastor Keith Graham, Pastor Albert Long, Pastor Vincent Smith, and just a host of men that helped me grow in spiritual maturity. While PAC ended a few years ago because each of us went on our separate ways, the former players that played for us, many of them went on to attend college. Many of them ended up getting scholarships. Some, I still keep in touch with them. I still keep in touch with their parents. And you know, they still say thank you for what you guys did in that program, even though it doesn't, you know, again, the leadership went their separate ways because God elevated each of us in our own various ways. It spoke volumes to what we set out to do by helping those young men grow. I just want to close with the same way I started, and that is sharing the text with you. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Men, it's time for us to put away childish things. It's time for us to grow in spiritual maturity, to grow in Christian discipleship, to grow in sanctification, and to become all that God has called us to be in our marriages, in our parenting, and in the world that he has called us to go and advance his kingdom. And so I always like to close by saying, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. I pray that you enjoyed today's message, and I pray that you will continue to grow in spiritual maturity as you follow Christ. Thanks, God bless, and have a great week. Take care.